I had lived on my 7-acre property for nearly 13 years, long before the subdivision called Birchwood Meadows HOA appeared across the road. When the land developers built their rows of matching beige houses and installed their freshly printed HOA rules apply signs everywhere, I remained entirely unaffected. My land had its own deed, boundary markers, tax ID, and legal status. I was not part of their association, not bound to their regulations, and most certainly not required to answer to their officers. For years, there had been small annoyances. Stray HOA newsletters taped to my gate. Occasional, friendly reminders left in my mailbox about yard height or driveway cleanliness. Once, someone even placed an HOA violation notice on my barn door, accusing me of non-compliant storage of livestock. I laughed for a solid minute before tossing it into the fire pit. I had no cows, the only livestock was 3 extremely lazy goats who spent most of their lives sunbathing. But all the minor irritations were nothing compared to what happened on a quiet Sunday morning. I had just finished tightening the bolts on my old tractor when I heard a loud vehicle crunching across the gravel driveway. At first, I assumed it was a delivery truck or one of my neighbors dropping by. Instead, I found myself staring at a white SUV with green HOA decals slapped on the doors. It rolled to a stop as if it were some sort of official government vehicle. 3 individuals stepped out wearing matching navy polo shirts embroidered with Birchwood Meadows Compliance Division. The tallest man, who appeared to be in his late 40s and walked with exaggerated authority, marched toward me as if I had committed a federal offense. Flanking him were a woman with a clipboard and another man holding a digital camera, already snapping photos of my property like an overly enthusiastic crime scene investigator. "Good morning," I said, wiping grease from my hands. "Can I help you?" The tall man planted his feet firmly. "Sir, we are the HOA compliance officers for Birchwood Meadows. You are required to present identification immediately." His tone carried the weight of someone who truly believed he had jurisdiction. The woman added, "We received several reports that you have been conducting construction without approval. This is a violation. You must show your HOA identification card." I blinked slowly, unsure whether to laugh or stare in disbelief. Construction? Approval? HOA identification card? "I am not part of your HOA," I said clearly. "You have no authority here." The man's jaw tightened. "Every residence within a 1-mile radius of Birchwood Meadows must comply with our regulations. It is in our expanded community guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "Your guidelines do not apply to land you do not own." The officer with the camera snapped another picture of my tractor. "Unregistered heavy equipment on visible property line." The woman scribbled furiously on her clipboard. I leaned against the tractor and folded my arms. "You 3 need to leave before you embarrass yourselves." The tall man stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Failure to provide your identification will result in immediate escalation. We can issue fines, citations, and, if necessary, contact law enforcement for obstruction." There was a long silence. Birds chirped in the background, completely oblivious to the circus performance unfolding in my driveway. Then I said, "If you honestly believe you have the authority to arrest me on my own land, I strongly encourage you to call law enforcement." The woman looked irritated. "Sir, do not test us. Everyone in this area is part of our residential community." "Not me," I replied. "My property deed predates your entire subdivision." The tall officer looked unconvinced. "We will determine that." He motioned for the man with the camera to take more photos. Then he turned back to me. "If you do not cooperate, we will return with police backup." I let out a breath, now genuinely annoyed. "You know what? Go ahead. Call whoever you like. But I want to make something perfectly clear. Stepping onto my property without permission is trespassing. Continuing to take pictures is harassment. And claiming legal authority you do not possess is impersonation. That last word made them visibly uncomfortable. The woman asked sharply, "Are you refusing to comply?" "Yes," I said plainly. "I refuse to comply with made-up authority from an HOA that I am not part of." The tall man folded his clipboard with dramatic force. "Then this will go into the report. Expect consequences." The three marched back to their SUV, exchanging whispers. Before climbing in, the tall man pointed at me and announced loudly, "We will be back, and next time, you will not have a choice." The SUV sped down my driveway in a cloud of dust. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet return. But as the dust settled, a strange chill ran down my spine. They were angry, and angry HOA officers, especially entitled ones, rarely back down. I had a feeling this was only the beginning. Morning sunlight was barely touching the neighborhood when I stepped out onto my porch with a mug of coffee, determined to enjoy one peaceful moment before the day started. For a few blissful minutes, everything was quiet. Birds were perched on the power lines. A couple jogged down the opposite sidewalk. The air smelled like fresh cut grass. And then, the HOA patrol arrived. Not real law enforcement. Not city code officers. Just two middle-aged men in neon vests that said HOA Compliance Unit, in what was obviously vinyl iron-on letters they bought on sale. A white SUV rolled to a stop in front of my house, the engine rattling like it had been held together by prayer and duct tape. Both men climbed out, clipboard in hand, puffing up their chests like they were about to raid a drug cartel. I sighed. Here we go. The first man strutted up my driveway like he had authority bestowed from the heavens. He tapped his badge, yes, an Amazon novelty badge, and announced, "Sir, we need to see your identification immediately." I blinked. "Why?" The second man, shorter and rounder, stepped forward. "Failure to comply may result in an HOA citation or possible removal from the premises." "Removal?" I repeated. "From my property?" "That is correct," he said confidently, even though his hand was shaking as he tried to look tough. I slowly sipped my coffee. "Gentlemen, I am not part of your HOA." The taller man frowned. "We have received reports that you have been living here without registering with the association." I stared at him. "I bought this house 5 years ago. It predates your HOA by almost 2 decades." They exchanged glances, clearly unaware of that detail. Undeterred, clipboard guy flipped a page. "Yes, well, new rules state that any home within the Livingston Oaks influence zone must comply with the HOA's standards." I raised an eyebrow. "Influence zone? That sounds like something from a bad sci-fi movie." He cleared his throat, annoyed. "Sir, do not interfere with official HOA business. Now, present your ID." "You're not law enforcement," I said calmly. "We enforce community law," the shorter man said proudly, gesturing to the patch on his vest. I leaned in closer. The patch read, "Neighborhood Safety Team, EST 2023. It even had a little eagle clip art. I almost laughed. Before I could respond, Karen burst from behind them like she'd been waiting in the shadows. "There!" she shouted, pointing at me like she had spotted a fugitive. "He's being difficult already. I told you he would be." The men straightened, as if receiving commands from their queen bee. "Sir," the tall one said, "if you do not provide ID, we will be forced to escalate." "Escalate to what?" I asked. "Bad Yelp reviews?" "Sir. Please. Do not make this harder." I put up my hand. "Hold on. Are either of you trained? Licensed? Certified? Do you even know the property lines in this neighborhood?" Their silence told me everything. Karen crossed her arms, smirking triumphantly. "See? He thinks he can just ignore us. He thinks he's above the rules." Karen, I said, I literally am not in your HOA. Nonsense. She barked. You live adjacent to our community. That means you're subject to our oversight. That is not how property rights work. She scoffed. Well, see what the officers think about that. The two men perked up again, suddenly trying to loom over me. Last chance to comply, clipboard guy said. I stepped back inside my house, shutting the door gently in their faces. Their muffled yelling continued for another minute before my Ring doorbell caught the sound of Karen shrieking. We will call the real police. The HOA compliance unit scrambled back to their SUV, acting like they had just concluded a major operation, and sped down the street, completely forgetting to close their gas cap. I sat back on my couch, exhaled, and thought, good. Let them call the police. Because the irony was going to be beautiful. I was the police. Well, not exactly a street patrolling officer. I was a state-certified property law investigator who regularly testified in legal disputes, land boundary conflicts, and yes, HOA overreach cases. These people had just demanded ID from the one person in the county who could dismantle their entire organization with paperwork alone. But that wasn't even the best part. I knew something they didn't. The HOA had been operating under expired incorporation documents for 7 months. Meaning, no legal authority. No enforcement power. No ability to collect dues. And no right to demand anyone's ID. Karen had no clue. But she was about to find out. And she was not going to like it. Night fell over Maple Crest, but the tension from earlier never really faded. The HOA officers had retreated with their empty threats, but I knew people like them. Bullies rarely walked away quietly. They sat at home, stewing, plotting, and waiting for the moment they could regain the upper hand. I spent the evening reinforcing my driveway gate, double-checking the security feed, and setting my outdoor cameras to high alert mode. I did not expect trouble. But I definitely anticipated it. And right on cue, 9:47 p.m. sharp, my front motion sensor pinged. The screen lit up with something halfway between hilarious and infuriating. The same 3 HOA officers, Greg, the self-appointed president, Denise, the clipboard queen, and Carl, the silent one built like a refrigerator, were at the end of my driveway again. But this time, they came dressed in matching neon vests, holding clipboards, flashlights, and what looked like citation books. They had fully convinced themselves they were some kind of law enforcement. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. As soon as they saw me, Greg puffed out his chest like a blowfish. Sir, you are obstructing official HOA business by ignoring mandatory identification procedures. I raised an eyebrow. Official HOA business. On MY property. At 10 o'clock at night? Denise stepped forward dramatically. This community has rules. You live here. Therefore, you follow them. You have 30 seconds to hand over identification or face consequences. Let me repeat this slowly, I said calmly. I am not part of your HOA. I never signed anything. I have no legal obligation to follow your rules. Carl, who had been silent until now, muttered, well, see what the sheriff says. I smirked. Call him. Please. I insist. They exchanged confused looks. HOA bullies usually scare people into submission. They rely on fear, not actual law. Someone calling their bluff? That was new territory for them. But Greg doubled down. We already did call the sheriff. He's on his way now. And when he gets here, he'll force you to comply. I shrugged. Perfect. I could not ask for a better audience. I walked back to the porch, sat on the steps, and waited with them. They whispered amongst themselves nervously, probably rehearsing lies they planned to tell the police. 10 minutes later, bright headlights rolled up the lane. The sheriff's deputy stepped out. Deputy Alvarez, a calm, level-headed officer, looked at me first, then at the HOA officers, then at the property line. "So," he said, arms crossed. "Which one of you called in the report?" Greg stepped forward self-importantly. "Officer, thank you for coming. We have a resident here refusing to show identification or comply with HOA regulations. We need him legally compelled." The deputy held up a hand. "Stop. Let me ask the obvious question. Sir," he turned to me, "do you live in the Maple Crest Homeowners Association?" "Nope," I replied. "Never signed anything. Not a member. This is private land." The deputy slowly turned back to the trio. His expression said everything. "You called me. For someone who's not part of your HOA. Refusing to follow your HOA rules?" Denise chimed in, waving her clipboard like holy scripture. "But he should be part of the HOA. His land is inside the community boundary." Alvarez frowned. "Boundary lines mean nothing. Membership depends on contracts, deeds, and agreements. Do you have paperwork proving he's under HOA governance?" They froze. Greg swallowed. "Not technically. But..." The deputy's voice tightened. "Then you have zero authority to demand identification from him." Denise tried again. "But officer..." "No," he interrupted firmly. "Your HOA rules apply only to paying members. He is not one. Therefore, your demands are meaningless." Greg's face turned red, not embarrassment red, but rage red. "So you're taking his side?" he snapped. The deputy stepped forward, leaning in slightly. "I am taking the side of the law. And the law says you cannot trespass onto private property after dark to harass someone." The three officers stiffened like they had been slapped. Greg stammered, "Trespass? We were conducting community business." "Community business ends where his property begins," Alvarez said coldly. "If you step onto his land again without permission, I will be the one forcing you to show identification." Carl mumbled, "We didn't step on his land." "Oh, you absolutely did," I said, pointing to my security camera glowing above the porch. "And every second of it is recorded. If needed, I can send it to the county if you come back." At that moment, they realized the situation had flipped completely. They had not cornered me, I had cornered them. The deputy turned to me. "Do you want them formally trespassed?" I considered it. Part of me wanted to say yes. They deserved it. But I had a better plan in mind for later, something that would hurt their HOA much more than a simple warning. "For now," I said, "just let them know this better never happen again." Alvarez nodded. "You three. Leave. Now. And do not return here unless you want criminal charges." The HOA officers backed away slowly, muttering angrily but clearly terrified. They walked so stiffly it looked almost cartoonish. As soon as their taillights disappeared, Alvarez shook his head. "People like that give me a headache. You should be fine from now on, but if they bother you again, call me directly." I thanked him, and he drove away. Once the night was quiet again, I took a deep breath. I knew the HOA officers would not stop here. People like them view no as a personal insult. Now that the sheriff had publicly embarrassed them, they would be plotting revenge. And I was right. Because the next morning, when I checked my mailbox, there was an envelope. Stamped in angry red letters. "Final notice, mandatory HOA compliance." They wanted war. And they were about to get one. The following week began with an eerie calm. No banging on my door, no HOA officers scanning my driveway, no threatening letters stuffed into my mailbox. It was quiet, too quiet. And when an HOA is quiet, it usually means they are planning something stupid. Sure enough, trouble rolled in at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. I was on my porch, drinking coffee and enjoying the breeze, when I saw the same trio of HOA officers marching up the street like they were on a military mission. Clipboards in hand. Sunglasses on. Chins lifted high like they owned the ground they were walking on. The only difference today? They brought reinforcements. 2 men I had never seen before followed behind them. These guys wore matching navy polos with "security contractor" printed across the chest, clearly hired muscle to make the HOA look official. The sight of them made me laugh into my coffee cup. This time, Karen, the president of the HOA board, didn't even bother pretending to be polite. She jabbed a finger toward my porch the moment she saw me. "There he is," she barked. "The uncooperative homeowner. You're obstructing HOA authority, and today we're resolving this once and for all." I leaned back in my chair and sighed. "Karen, for the 100th time, I'm not in your HOA." "Yes, you are," she snapped. "Your property is adjacent to HOA land, which means we have jurisdiction. And you have repeatedly failed to comply with mandatory ID checks." I blinked slowly. "Mandatory? What?" "ID checks," she repeated loudly, as if volume made stupidity correct. "All residents must carry HOA-approved identification at all times. And since you refused, the board has voted to escalate the matter." One of the hired security guys stepped forward, chest puffed out. "Sir," he said, trying to sound intimidating, "the HOA is requesting that you present ID immediately or you will be detained until the situation is resolved." I grinned. "Detained? By who? You?" "Yes," he said flatly. "And under what authority?" He hesitated. He glanced at Karen. She nodded vigorously. He cleared his throat. Under community authority?" I nearly choked laughing. Karen stomped her foot. "This is not a joke. This is a formal demand. If you do not comply, we will contact law enforcement." I finally stood. Not angrily. Not aggressively. Just calmly. Because I knew something they didn't. "Actually," I said, "since you're so determined to involve the police, I think that's a great idea." Karen smirked triumphantly, thinking she had won. "Good," she snapped. "Well, call them right now." "No," I corrected her. "I'll call them." They froze. Because unlike them, I wasn't bluffing. I didn't need the police to take my side. I needed them to see what the HOA was doing, because every part of this situation was illegal. Harassment. Misrepresentation of authority. Attempted detainment. Trespassing. Take your pick. So I pulled out my phone and called the county sheriff's office. When 2 patrol cars arrived 15 minutes later, the HOA officers huddled together like frightened pigeons, whispering frantically. The hired security guys suddenly looked unsure, shifting awkwardly as real badges approached. Deputy Ramirez stepped out first. I knew him, not as a friend, but as the officer who had once responded to a noise complaint on this very street. And he remembered me. "Morning," he said. "What's going on here?" Karen shoved forward. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man is refusing HOA authority. He wants present ID and he's obstructing security procedures." Ramirez stared at her. Then at me. Then at her again. "Ma'am. HOA authority doesn't extend to private homeowners outside the association." "It does," Karen shrieked. "His property is adjacent." "No," Ramirez said firmly. "That is not how any of this works." The second officer stepped toward the hired security contractors. "And you too," he said, "did you tell this man he would be detained?" The taller one swallowed hard. They told us." Doesn't matter who told you, the officer cut in. Private citizens cannot detain people for refusing to show ID to a homeowners association. That's impersonation of law enforcement. Karen's jaw dropped open. Ramirez turned to me. Sir? Do you want to file a report? I thought for a moment. Yes, I said. Harassment. Trespassing. Attempted detainment. And impersonating a legal authority. Karen screamed, "This is outrageous. We are the HOA." Ramirez replied, "And? That gives you exactly 0 legal rights outside your own boundaries." The officers separated everyone. Statements were taken. The hired security guys were released with a warning. But Karen and the other 2 HOA officers were not so lucky. When Ramirez returned to her, his tone was dry and final. "Ma'am, the board's actions violate multiple local statutes. You're being cited today, and the county will be reviewing your association's conduct." That did it. Karen's face collapsed. All that fake power, all that shouting, all the threats, it all melted into stunned silence. As the officers walked her back to her car, I realized something. This fight was never about ID. Or jurisdiction. Or even authority. It was about control. And when a person like Karen finally meets someone she cannot bully, not with rules, not with hired goons, not with fake authority, they fall apart. She got into her car trembling. As she drove away, the neighborhood watched from behind curtains. And for the first time since I moved here, it finally felt quiet. Really quiet. The kind of quiet that meant this war was over.